Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of science, faith, and pop culture, and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined with Krista Bontrager. You're all the things, right?
Yeah,
you're a theologian, first of all.
Yeah.
But you're also the Scholar Community Program Director.
Yes.
So, yeah, lots of things that you're doing. And one of the things that you do well here is kind of explain the theology behind some of our favorite stories, right?
I love the Bible.
Yes.
I've spent my whole adult life teaching the Bible, and I love bringing it to life for people, especially at Christmas time.
Yep. Yeah, and when we think of Christmas, we think of, all of the popular figures that we see on our wrapping paper and all that stuff, and we hear in the songs. Three of those figures, or some of those figures, because we'll talk about numbers later, but the wise men.
Yes. The wise men are an interesting character, if you will. In Matthew's gospel, Matthew chapter 2 talks about these men from the East who come to worship Jesus. And I think that what's so fascinating to me about them is that they're this classification called wise men. It actually doesn't say wise men in the Greek. It's this word magos, which is where we get the word magi. We just kind of turn the G into a J, but it's magos. And it's this very ancient word and kind of has Persian origins for this class of intellectuals who were known in the ancient world as consultants to the king. And sometimes they kind of are consultants in what we would call an occultic sense of consulting the stars or consulting certain divination practices. But they're not necessarily that. They were also very, very educated. And we also see some mentions of this in the Egyptian courts in Genesis and in Exodus, that there was this group, this kind of class of people called wise men. And so these magi, I have a theory about that.
Yeah, well, let's dive into that. But first, what we know now, what you just explained, is that they're highly educated.
Yeah.
So that's good to kind of remember as you get deeper into this. So what is your theory?
Yeah, well, because the word is kind of a Persian origin, that's interesting to me, because in the book of Daniel, in the Old Testament, in Daniel chapter 2, it mentions how Daniel was put in charge of all of the king's wise men. And in the Greek Septuagint translation of the Old Testament, it's the same word. It's these magos. So that makes me wonder if maybe these mysterious figures from the East were descendants of those men that Daniel supervised, if you will. And maybe they had some insight as to when the Messiah might appear through Daniel as a very loyal and faithful Jew. Because it's interesting to me, the book of Daniel is really a critical book that kind of gives us some clues about when the Messiah will come. And so I find it fascinating that these men kind of know to start looking for signs of when to come to look for this Jewish Messiah. Now, why would potentially Persian men from the East be interested in looking for a Jewish Messiah if there wasn't some understanding they had in their heritage about that?
Right. So then we have these highly educated men who are also very attentive and looking for the Messiah. So why did they visit the Christ child?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the text just tells us that they came to worship him. Well, why would they come to worship him? There was either something about the signs that told them that Jesus was a king, or there was something, I think, in their intellectual heritage that told them to go look for a Jewish Messiah. But then they come and they bring these gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These are not your average baby shower gifts.
Right.
They didn't bring diapers or anything. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, very interesting gifts that they bring to him, and very costly. And it makes me wonder why those gifts. And they kind of hint at the future death of Jesus. These are some of the elements that are used in burial practices.
So what do you think God was trying to communicate in having these wise men visit the Christ child?
Yeah, that's a great question. Matthew's gospel is written to Jewish Christians. It's written to Jews who have believed in Jesus as their Messiah. So it has a lot of Jewish information in it. But it also has these interesting, I call them foreshadowings, that God is now going to include the Gentiles as part of his covenant community. And we know that full blown in the book of Acts. But Matthew, I think, is just giving us a preview of coming attractions of what's going to happen in salvation history. And now Gentiles are going to be included. And I love how this couples with Luke's gospel that we talked about last year of the shepherds, because there's such a message of that when Jesus comes, it's an invitation to everyone. In today's vernacular, we would call it an invitation of inclusion, that it includes everyone. It includes the rich, as in the magi, and it includes the poor. It includes the social outcasts and people who are in the seats of power. It's an invitation to everyone. All are invited to come become part of the kingdom of God. Now, not all respond to that invitation. Not all decide to follow Jesus as their rabbi and become his disciple. But the invitation goes out to everyone.
I love that. I love that through the wise men and through the shepherds, we are hearing this story that Christ is here for the Gentiles and for the unclean. When we think of people today, Christ is here and available for all. That's such a beautiful message, especially around Christmas time. Thank you so much for sharing. If you want to hear more from Krista, visit reasons.org and search Krista Bontrager. Now we're going to head to a next segment where Dr. Fazal Rana talks about how Christians can reasonably disagree about the age of the earth. Let's check it out.